Superhero movies aren't dead, but the reason they worked at the level that they did is gone, and no reboot, cameo, or Avengers reunion can bring it back. Not because people hate superheroes, not because people are bringing phones into theaters, and not even because the genre suddenly got woke. They worked because audiences trusted them. And once that trust, that momentum breaks, the spectacle stops feeling like awe and just starts feeling long. For about a decade, superhero movies didn't just succeed, they pulled the entire industry forward. People showed up before reviews, flaws were forgiven. Each film made the next one feel more important. That kind of dominance doesn't happen by accident. It happens when technology, storytelling, and audience trust all line up at the same time. So, to understand why that era ended, we have to look at what created that momentum in the first place and what quietly drained it away. Superhero movies didn't explode because people love superheroes. If that were true, Hollywood would have flooded the market in 1978 after Superman. And to be clear, Superman was a massive blockbuster smash hit. It proved superhero movies could work at the highest level. And yet Hollywood still didn't rush to make even a single other superhero movie. Not one. A decade later, Batman in 1989 was another huge success. And still, no avalanche of superhero movies. Spider-Man in 2002 was enormous. Still, no takeover of superhero movies. The explosion didn't happen until two things converged for the first time in history. First, technology finally caught up to imagination. By the mid 2000s, CGI stopped looking like good CGI and started looking real. Weight, texture, physics, photorealism. For me, the moment everything changed was the first live action Transformers trailer. As a kid in the 1980s, for me, the fantasy wasn't just, a truck turns into a robot. It was the impossible complexity of it. A massive tractor trailer, heavy, industrial, steel, real, unfolding into a walking machine made of hundreds of thousands of interlocking parts, panels rotating, pistons sliding, gears recalibrating, every component obeying mechanical logic. And that was just one robot. The truly insane idea was scale, an entire armada of vehicles, trucks, tanks, helicopters, jets, all transforming, all unique, all photorealistic, not an illusion, but a system, a world. At the time, that didn't just feel unlikely, it felt conceptually unreachable. Then, suddenly, decades later, it wasn't imagination anymore. It was real, not stylized, not symbolic, physically believable. Most people remember exactly where they were the first time they saw a trailer like that. Not because it was loud, but because it felt impossible 5 minutes earlier. That kind of moment only happens once. It felt like the comics in your head were coming alive. Iron Man flying through real airspace, metal plates locking into place at lethal speed, Thor summoning lightning that feels ancient and catastrophic. These stories belonged on a giant screen. They justified spectacle, but that advantage is gone. Second, Marvel turned superhero movies into long form myth. When Marvel Studios took control of its characters, these weren't random adaptations anymore. They became serialized mythology. Characters evolved, consequences carried forward, arcs paid off over years. Iron Man wasn't just cool armor, it was personal transformation. A man who starts as a selfish weapons dealer is forced to confront the cost of his own genius, his own ego, and his own irresponsibility, and chooses to change. Civil War wasn't just punching, it was ideology colliding with friendship, where every fight damaged relationships that had been built over years. And Endgame wasn't just spectacle, it was closure on a mythic scale. Characters we had grown with for over a decade faced final sacrifices, final consequences, and final choices, and the story actually let those endings matter. Technology made it possible. Storytelling made it meaningful. Momentum made it unstoppable. And momentum is everything. Momentum means trust. When Marvel had momentum, people showed up before reviews. Flaws were forgiven. Each movie lifted the next one. But once momentum breaks, you don't get it back with phases, cameos, or branding. You only get it back the hard way, one great story at a time. So, where did momentum break? The break happened when studios and writers began treating moral positioning, and in fact, superficial moral positioning, as the point of the story, rather than something expressed through the story. This is where conversations usually go wrong, so let me be very precise. This is not about morals being bad. Morals matter, values matter. Great myths have always carried moral weight. What changed wasn't the presence of morals, it was where the storytelling energy shifted. Instead of asking, how does this character change under pressure, stories increasingly asked, what does this character represent? And how do we signal that clearly? When that shift happens, something fundamental breaks, because myth doesn't work on declarations, it works on trial. It works when characters are pushed into situations where their beliefs cost them something, where they fail, adapt, sacrifice, and become something new. When moral correctness is signaled up front, instead of earned through struggle, tension collapses. You don't bond with characters because they're already right. You bond with characters because they're tested. And when stories stop trusting that process, the genre doesn't collapse overnight. It quietly loses momentum. You don't need theory to notice it. You feel it in your stomach. This is the pattern underneath everything. Myth requires cost, requires limitation, struggle, training, failure, sacrifice, earned transformation. Take Steve Rogers, Captain America. He's enlistment age, but physically weak, sickly, completely outmatched. And before he has powers, before he has a shield, before anyone believes in him, a grenade is thrown into an area full of soldiers, and Steve jumps on it. No strength, without having the serum, no applause, just heart. He does that 100% from courage. And that moment tells you everything. The serum doesn't make Steve worthy, it reveals what was already there. Now compare that to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Sam Wilson becomes Captain America. This isn't about whether he can be Captain America, it's about whether the story earns it. Steve earned the shield through repeated mythic trials, including risking his life when he had nothing to gain. But Sam's turning point is framed largely through ideological positioning and a speech, not a defining test that hits the audience in the gut. That's why so many viewers pointed to Bucky. He had super soldier strength, a deep emotional connection to Steve, and a redemption arc built on guilt, restraint, and control. So the problem isn't race. The problem is the story tells us Sam deserves the mantle instead of making us feel it. Or take Captain Marvel. Carol starts extremely powerful to begin with. Her arc is about discovering she was restrained. But that discovery doesn't create vulnerability. It makes her feel even more unstoppable. And when power increases without visible cost, challenge disappears and identification goes with it. Contrast that with Tony Stark. In Iron Man, Tony builds the suit in a cave, injured, terrified, failing repeatedly. In Iron Man 2, his own creation is killing him. In Iron Man 3, he loses the suit entirely and has to rely on ingenuity and fear. So he starts with arrogance and failure and goes through pain, and that results in growth. Audiences bond with the process, with the evolution of a character. They bond with the becoming, not with the already is. Or take She-Hulk. Early in the series, Bruce Banner talks about controlling rage, about years of trauma, isolation, and suicidal thoughts that went into becoming the Hulk. The show immediately undercuts all that by having Jennifer tell him she's already better at managing anger because she deals with catcalling, workplace sexism, and being talked down to. Those experiences are real, but the story treats them as a shortcut, a way to bypass struggle instead of dramatizing it. Instead of watching a character learn control, we're told she already has it. And by the way, it's also insulting for the character of the Hulk. So comedy itself doesn't kill myth, but contempt for myth does. This problem goes beyond Marvel. Look at The Force Awakens. Rey pilots the Millennium Falcon expertly on her first attempt, pulling off maneuvers that even Han Solo struggled with in the original trilogy. She later corrects Han on his own ship's systems and begins using advanced Force abilities with almost no training. Contrast that with Luke. Luke fails constantly. He gets beaten. He loses mentors. He doubts himself. He loses his arm. That's why we remember him. Myth requires failure before mastery. Remove failure, and tension disappears. Nostalgia can't fix this. Cyclops appearing in official Avengers trailers isn't an accident. It tells you exactly where Marvel's head is at. They're pulling recognition levers, hoping memory alone can reignite momentum. Nostalgia can remind you why you cared. It cannot rebuild the care itself. Phones also didn't kill theaters. If they did, Top Gun Maverick wouldn't have exploded. People didn't stop going because of phones. They stopped going because too many movies stopped earning attention. Phones aren't the enemy. Movies that don't demand attention are. And budgets are also killing the genre. $250 to $300 million and more means the films can have no risk because there's too much money on the line. That means flattened characters, stories that must offend no one. The solution is to spend less and cast unknowns who not only cost less, but because there's no baggage associated with them, they can be the characters that they're supposed to be up on the screen. Let the characters, not the brands, carry the myth. These stories need to feel worthy of the big screen again. Iron Man flying mattered because it felt dangerous. Thor mattered because gods reshaped worlds. The Avengers mattered because failure meant collapse on a mythic scale. Spectacle without consequence is noise. It's not epic. And team-ups aren't the problem. The thing is, they only work when we already care. Team-ups are multipliers. If a character doesn't work alone, they don't magically work in a group. Heroes matter when they're essential. When everyone is a god, no one is. So no, superhero movies aren't dead. But the era where they dominated culture by default is over. They rose on technological awe, mythic storytelling, unstoppable momentum. They lost momentum when superficial moral signaling replaced earned myth, when characters stopped paying real costs, when spectacle stopped justifying itself. But they can recover, but only with exceptional writing, smaller budgets, stronger solo films, and epic consequences that earn the big screen. They may never be 2012 again, but they can be great again. Audiences didn't abandon these stories. The stories stopped meeting them halfway. This is Dek Webber, and whatever happens with the industry, keep loving movies. Good stories are still worth caring about.